What is up? Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Matt Forte, and we are here live at the Build Studio in New York City. Our next guest is an Olivier Award-nominated actor. Now, you've seen him in some of your favorite TV shows like Smash, The Good Wife, and Mindy Project. You also recognize him from one of the largest film franchises of all time, also known as the Pirates of the Caribbean series. But starting today, you can catch him in the Sundance Now's new international thriller, Next of Kin. Folks, the great Jack Davenport is here. Make some noise, please, for Jack. How about that, huh? That is the correct response. Now, we're going to bring him out here in just a second, but before we do, I believe we have a trailer for the show, so let's go ahead and run that clip. Hey!
Look at you! Danny on his way? I thought you called him. Well, texted him.
Great London police. Your nephew, Danish.
Danny.
You have no idea where he is at this point.
It's Mona. Can you call me the minute you get this?
He just cleared out 6 weeks ago.
Is that normal for your nephew? Disappearing off the radar like that?
You can see where they're going with this, can't you?
We have a warrant to search these premises.
He's not even religious.
Are we in trouble here?
Danny, where are you? He's in trouble. He needs our help.
The answer's staring you right in the face.
If you hurt my wife, I will destroy you.
This is family. Oh, my God.
Jack Davenport, everybody, right here.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, my goodness, Jack. Wow. Congratulations on this show, man. This is some fantastic television. I'm really excited to talk to you about this. We're going to get into it, but first, one, how are you doing? How's Jack doing?
I'm very well.
Yeah?
Very much right.
That's awesome, man.
It's been a while since I've seen this. It's quite good to be reminded what it's about. It looks quite good.
That's good. We're gonna jog some of those memories throughout the talk. One of the first things I was really excited to ask you about, though, you just wrapped up I believe you wrapped up your Broadway debut. Is that right?
I know I'm a bit old to be making debuts of any description, but yes, technically that was my Broadway debut. Yes.
That's phenomenal. Yeah, we just had Condola here. It was a wonderful conversation. What was that? You're no stranger to the stage, but this is Broadway. What was Broadway like for Jack? What was it like for you, man?
Yeah, I mean, at a kind of slightly prosaic level, it's actually just quite, the regularity of working in a theatre is quite a nice thing. You kind of know where you're going to be every night. Whereas when you do this kind of stuff, you're travelling around a lot. I sound like I'm complaining, but it's quite nice going, all right, 6 o'clock, I'll be in the theatre. At 8:42, I'll be on stage. And at 11:01, I'll be riding my bike home.
You have a routine.
Yeah. And it was also very nice to... I haven't done a play for like 12 years. Well, that's because I have mouths to feed.
Busy, yeah.
It was very nice to kind of remind myself what that kind of work is like. And working with people like Condola was, she got nominated for a Tony for it, but it was good. It was good.
Yeah, no, for sure. Did it take time, having been 12 years, with the 12 years having passed there, does it take time to sort of recalibrate that skill set? How quickly does it come right back to you?
I was worried about that. It turns out it is a bit like riding a bike. And so it was all right. But to be honest, though, one of the reasons I wanted to do it was that it was to rehearse something. In film and TV, you're pretty much constantly recording your first impulse and then moving right along.
That's it.
And then you've got to keep going. And so, what the luxury of theatre is you spend weeks in a rehearsal room and you can consciously go, I think this is probably a bad idea, but I'll give it a go. And it doesn't matter. And that creatively is kind of interesting. So maybe, probably at the beginning of the rehearsal process, they were all wondering why they'd asked me to do it, but I felt like I got back on the horse relatively quickly.
That's pretty cool to hear, man. This may seem like a silly question, but with the 12-year absence, did your time on Smash at all influence your desire to get back? I know it's a different world entirely.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I can't sing at all, so that would have been a problem. But from the point of view of that show, in Smash, I spent years sitting in rooms full of incredibly talented young people doing something that's very difficult and making it look easy, and then I would shout at them and make them cry. just watching them do that stuff and seeing how beautifully realized a lot of the kind of full production numbers were. I did, and we were in theaters a lot, and I'd be sort of skulking around in the wings and shouting at people there. But yeah, I mean, it's a familiar place.
Exactly.
And so I probably on some level, yes.
Yeah, exactly. You're not doing the same kind of work at all, but you're in those environments and you're replicating that moment in that time.
Sure.
So that's got to tickle some part of your creative brain.
An itch needed scratching, and now I've scratched it.
And now you've scratched it.
And 12 more years can go by, and then we can reconvene, and I'll have done another
That's the
play.
schedule you're on.
Yes,
Every
I'm
12
on the 12-year
years,
plan.
we'll get you to the stage, man. Well, you grew up around actors, and you grew up around it, sort of in this world. Were you ever felt yourself drawn towards the live audience, towards the camera? You mentioned earlier you had mouths to feed, which I know is kind of in jest, but also
not
serious.
entirely.
Not entirely, right? Yeah, there's some truth there.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, the truth is, both my parents were actors. My mother's now a director, but and I grew up around actors. And if you're a kid, I mean, all the things that, all the sort of cliches about actors in an adult world about them being kind of needy narcissists is in some way pretty true. But if you're a kid, actors are great because they're sort of childish and playful because that's what we do. And so I, as a child, and this makes it sound like it was a conscious thought process, and it wasn't. But somewhere, as deep down as things get when you're 9, I was like, I want to be in that tribe. I don't quite know why I want to be in it, but they seem like kind of fun people. And to be honest, that's been proved correct. I've always enjoyed the company of actors. What that says about me is anyone's guess. That's fair. You can all judge that. But it wasn't it wasn't ambition or anything like that. It was just like, I want to be in that tribe.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, just felt right. Well, speaking about the company of phenomenal actors, let's talk about this show. This is a great show.
Thank you.
And a lot of talented people telling a pretty crazy story. I was enthralled. I want to know, take me to the beginning, man, because you don't see a lot of stories like this. How did you get involved? What did you think of as you were reading about Next to Kin?
They sent it to me about 6 or 7 months before we shot it. Archie Panjabi, who many of you probably know from The Good Wife, was already attached, which was a big draw because she's fantastic. And straight away, I was very taken aback. The show is about domestic radicalization, which is not the easiest subject to approach on any level, but it's a fact of life. And from the get-go, the way this show approaches that thorny subject, I felt was very sensitive and potentially kind of enlightening, because it's one of those subjects that no one likes talking about. And certainly when there are horrific acts of terrorism committed by US citizens or UK citizens, people are understandably very quick to retreat to their corners and be scared and angry. And that's human nature. That being said, those people that commit those acts have mothers and brothers and nephews and cousins, and they didn't ask for this. And the approach the show took was to ask that question: what about the people who love that person who blew themselves up or attacked people with a knife in a street? Because they have feelings too, and I think it was a way of trying to approach the unapproachable, because I think it's difficult for people to have any... We weren't asking the audience to have sympathy, but more specifically empathy. Yeah. And I think that is a good way of trying to approach a subject where people find it easy and to be like, well, that's horrific and wrong, but if that's all we do, then the perpetrators of those acts have kind of won. Yeah. And the other thing that I found very immediately arresting about it as a setup was that in the story, I'm married to Archie's character, Mona, and we have this large, extended Anglo-Indian family. And we shot all the sort of domestic scenes first, before kind of all hell breaks loose. Yeah. There were kind of generally scenes of some kind of family togetherness and bad things haven't happened yet. And for weeks, I was the only non-Anglo-Indian actor in all these scenes. And the truth is that a lot of Britain looks like that, right, but no one ever represents it. And it was completely, it wasn't commented on. It was just, it was just there. And I think that in itself is, it shouldn't be, but it was slightly revolutionary way of presenting a modern British family in which the minority were white. And I think that helps kind of approach the rest of the story, because we're asking a lot of the audience as things get more and more complicated.
No, absolutely. Well, that's the other thing too that makes you have a perspective you don't usually see. You have a story you're not usually told. You have a cast that all these things is what makes this show that is tackling something very challenging, but it makes it very refreshing and it makes it very exhilarating to watch in a way. There's a lot to unpack in that explanation. I want to.
There is. Sorry.
No, it's quite all right. We've got plenty of time. But let's start with. Let's just go back a bit. You said you got it 6 months before you filmed.
I did.
I was doing a little bit of research, and we talked briefly about this backstage, but you guys filmed right on the heels of last year's attack in London, right?
Attacks plural, which
attacks,
is sort of
yeah.
which is the point, and understandably and necessarily had a big effect on how we ended up telling this, or at least finishing the story, because in brief, when we started filming, there had been 0 mass casualty attacks in the UK for a decade. By the time we'd finished, there had been 3. It was literally like 1 a month.
Yeah.
And there was Manchester, then there were 2 in London. And obviously, and indeed, the way that the security services reacted to them they reacted in some cases in ways that we'd never seen before on British streets, and they had to, retrofit the script a bit, because all of a sudden how we ended our story didn't really make sense in this new world. And it just goes, I mean, in some ways, that's the difficulty of trying to tell stories about difficult subjects like this, is that our own relationship to those issues is constantly changing in the light of current events. And, but I still, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try.
Right.
But it was, and the things that happened in London last year are shocking just in themselves. Yeah. They were both shocking and weirdly complicating in terms of what we were trying to do. And in some ways, it actually gave the project a great sense of mission,
like a purpose,
because what the kind of the empathy project, as it were, became kind of slightly sort of turbocharged, really, because of course people, if there are people running through the streets of your capital city waving machetes, and then of course in the immediate aftermath people retreat to their corners and don't want to hear it.
What happens on set for you as a performer? Not to trivialize the nature of any of this, but you have your human emotions, then you have a job to do, which is to tell this story. Does it become more challenging for you to make decisions as an actor? Does something like that, having such a fresh memory of something like that, does it inform your decisions as a performer on a project like this?
Yes and no. I mean, in the case of this one thing that did happen, which I had already pushed for before those situations occurred, which was that for all the picture I've just painted of these early scenes where there's this kind of joyful, colourblind, rainbow nation of a British family living together in perfect harmony, which they are, but then this stuff happens. And the truth is that when people are afraid, they're not their best selves.
Yeah.
And on some level, when my character finds out that a not immediately related family member, but slightly distant, is perhaps responsible for some bad things, and he's, you know, Anglo-Pakistani, he immediately starts to, in a fearful way, not be his best self and start to respond in a kind of slightly not cliched in terms of storytelling, but you know how people do when they're afraid, and in some ways the things that happened in London gave greater impetus to push that side of the story, because I think that needs to be. We shouldn't pretend that people can hide behind things, and the love they have for their family members isn't necessarily going to be, you know, love isn't necessarily going to conquer all in the immediate aftermath of a situation like that. And I think it would be disingenuous to pretend otherwise.
No, absolutely. No, the show, with as much the delicacy and precision with which we're handling this conversation, the show itself.
So I'm sorry I'm not doing a sitcom with a lot of dick jokes in it, but I did do that once.
That is true. That is very true.
We're just not talking about that today.
No.
I've been in them, just not this.
And that's it's a 12-year cycle, just like the Broadway thing.
The sitcom dick joke thing is just right around the corner.
It's coming back around. We're going to get you for that as well. But that's just not what we're doing today, man. And that's fine. But I wanted to call out too. We've said Archie, of course, and then Vivek Kalra, another phenomenal person in this show. Talk about that cast. Yeah, I feel like an actor or any creative person, whenever they choose a project or something, you go through that project, you go through that experience, you come out the other side having grown, not just as an artist, but as a person as well. I was learning stuff just watching this thing. Talk about working with these young actors, working with these people on this show, what you learned and how you felt coming out the other side of it.
Well, I mean, you know, for one thing, such is the nature of how show business works in this country and back in the UK, and it's all changing now, and that's all for the good. But, you know, there were these young British Asian actors who, first of all, I haven't lived in the UK for nearly 20 years, but I didn't know who they were, and here they were with pivotal roles in this show, and I was just kind of staggered at their facility. And it's partly because there is so much less work for, you know, British Asian actors that it's even more difficult to succeed than it is if you're from some other ethnic background. So there was that. Also, some of the older actors, the lady who plays my mother-in-law in this show is a woman called Shabana Azmi, and to my total shame, I hadn't seen any of her work before. But we shot a couple of scenes early on, and I was like, man, she's quite good, isn't she? And then I IMDb'd her on my phone quietly, and it was like film credits, and she's been in like 189 films. I'm not kidding.
I did the same thing.
She's like a Bollywood superstar, but like not the kind of Bollywood with the dancing and the singing, but like edge. There's a part of Bollywood apparently which is like this kind of edgy indie Bollywood, which has been around for like 40, 50 years, and she's like the Parker Posey of India. And when we would shoot stuff in the streets, like Anglo-Asian, like bystanders would literally have coronaries when they'd see this little old lady. It was hilarious.
Legend.
She's a complete legend. Not a lot of people ever have made more than 189 films. Not even Vincent Price.
No, not even, I think maybe Samuel Jackson's getting close.
He's getting
but like
close.
honestly, that's it. It's a high bar. It's pretty incredible. You can tell. I know it's only for a brief moment in the beginning when that joyous sort of rainbow perfect
It's
world
quite
moment.
short-lived.
It's quite short-lived. But it's important though too, because it does give you, as an audience member, it sort of gives you this reference point and sort of this reminder as you think back of like the thing that's been fractured by these terrible
Absolutely.
things, right?
Yes.
So it's very necessary, short-lived though it may be. It's a very important part of the story. How long did you actually get to spend in that zone with these amazing people before you had to shift gears?
Well, fortunately and sensibly, they sort of scheduled that up front. So we all we're all together, and we were doing, you know, fun party acting. And yes, I got to do terrible Bollywood dancing with the aforementioned Shabana. It's quite bad. I improvised it and then regretted it, and then they used it.
Oh, it's
the moral of the story: don't improvise too much. And so yes, there was a the onus was on us to kind of quickly generate this sense of this warm. Warm is the most important thing, because I mean, I was being a little dismissive when I was going, you know, colorblind, Rainbow Nation, but actually that's what it is. and that's what's at stake.
Right.
And so you only have a few minutes in a show like this to set that up. But I think it was it was good for all of us, because as the story gets more complicated, all of these characters get pushed to, you know, into different orbits.
Yeah.
And we all had that kind of residual memory of when we were all together, and that there was this kind of unusual in terms of, I can't think of many British television dramas, and quite frankly, US television dramas, that have represented a family of that kind of mixed ethnicity in that way, for a story that then ends up the way it does. So, you know, yeah, I think it was useful for all of us to have that memory.
We're going to turn over to the audience in just a second to take some questions. But one, as I started to say earlier before we mentioned the dick jokes and the comedy shows, that this show
doesn't have any of those things.
No, it does not. But it does a phenomenal job, as I've said before, and I'll say it again, of telling the story in a very eloquent way, in a very sensitive way, and a very honest way. You know, and I loved it, and I really enjoyed it. So congratulations on it.
Thank you very
for making it. Everybody out there, you can watch it today on Sundance Now. There's a free trial available. There's no reason not to check this show out. It's got amazing actors doing amazing work and telling an amazing story. So definitely check that out. Sundance Now, right now. How lucky is that? Let's go ahead and take some questions from the audience. We got some microphones out there. First one right up front.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Going back to the dick jokes.
Yes. When in doubt.
When in doubt. As you can tell by my accent, I'm a Brit.
Yes, you're.
And I was brought up with Coupling, This Life, and Ultraviolet, which I thought was a little bit underrated, but it was a great show.
Thanks very much.
So when you look back on the TV shows that you've done in the States and the UK, is there any sort of role or TV show that kind of you look back and think, yeah, that was a really good show, that was a lot of fun?
Well, I mean, one always does things on the basis that you hope they won't be awful. The bar is low there. But those three that you mentioned for different reasons, I'm proud of being a part of. No one else watching this will have heard of any of them. Partly because some of them were filmed in the Cretaceous period. But This Life, because it at the time was a very unflinching representation of how young people lived in a modern city, and didn't pull its punches in terms of, it didn't moralize, put it that way. And that was, at the time, the early 90s, for those of you who weren't born then, was quite revolutionary, which seems a ridiculous thing to say, but there you go. Coupling, because who doesn't like a good dick joke? I mean, this whole thing's become about that. And Ultraviolet, yes, I agree, it launched the career of a now very unknown actor called Idris Elba. Whatever happened to him?
Never heard of him.
Never heard of him since. It's the curse of working with me. I've launched a lot of very successful careers. And that was a good one too, because, I mean, we predated the world's complete obsession with vampires by a critical 5 years. Yeah. I'd probably still be doing it now if we'd been on 5 years later, so yeah, there you go.
We're going to take one more in a second, but there's something that just occurred to me, is that this is this is the first time in America, really, that anybody can see the show. Are you excited to see if there's any difference or how an American audience sort of responds to this show versus what you've seen already.
Yeah,
overseas.
I mean, I think, look, it sounds a bit bleak, but, you know, acts designed to scare us are a fact of life. And part of the reason they happen is because we have the privilege of living in free societies where you can say what you want and not be thrown in jail. And with that privilege comes responsibility, unfortunately. And I think it's anything that encourages people to think about an issue in which they generally don't react in the most admirable of ways. It's a lot safer to experience that via the medium of a scripted television show than to actually be going through it yourself. And I think that, I mean, not to be too, you know, kind of, I wish we could all just give each other a hug, but I sort of do. And I think I would be curious to see how American audiences react to this, because fortunately, this country has had to deal with less of that sort of thing than European countries. And as I say, it's a lot more mediated to watch it. I mean, that's like the worst pitch for a show I've ever heard. It's just,
but
you'll laugh, you'll cry.
Yeah. First of all, I said excited. I should have said curious. Excitement was the wrong term.
Curiously excited.
Curiously excited. And second of all, we're going to take one more. I got the second one, I know for sure. But I would be remiss not to point out that the eloquence and the brilliance with which you oscillate between the serious nature and talking about the dick jokes is something to be commended. I think
It's become a theme, hasn't it?
It's become a theme. It's what we're titling the conversation, in fact. But we're going to take one last question, but I wanted to point it out that I've had a blast talking with
Thank
you here.
you.
Yeah,
It's been
of
good
course,
fun. Thank you.
absolutely. We got one more for you right here.
Hi, we're going to take an online question.
Oh.
Susie wants to know, the last 2 minutes of the latest episode were shocking. Were you surprised at all when reading the script, and do you have any insight on what happens next?
The last 2 minutes of Next of Kin.
Yes.
We're shocked. She's already watched the whole thing. That's so impressive.
First episode or latest episode? Because I mean, they're almost
latest
shocking every time.
episode.
You said
So
latest.
the whole thing's online, right? Well, so whoever's just binge been watching television for the last 8-9 hours.
Entirely possible.
Yes, there should be some sort of prize for that. Was I surprised? The answer to that question is this: the ending went through a lot of changes because of the events that we've described, and there was a lot of back and forth about how responsibly and realistically to bad analogy, but like land the plane narratively, because it's complicated and one can't be seen to let characters off the hook who have made very poor decisions. At the same time, you want people to feel emotionally satisfied, but given that we're dealing with real world events in a fictional manner, not that that makes a huge amount of sense, there was a lot of back and forth. And if you were shocked, what was her name again? Susie. Binge watch Susie, as you'll now be known as.
Oh, binge watching.
Then on some level, our work here is done. It was meant to be shocking on some level.
Yeah.
But thanks for the question.
Thank you, Susie, and thank you, Nige, for your question. We're going to wrap this thing up. But before we go, a quick reminder, of course, Sundance Now. Be like Susie. Go ahead and watch it. And if you don't have Sundance Now at this moment, you can get a free trial and check out the show. Jack, rather it's on stage or on TV or the movies, whatever, man, I think what you do is brilliant. And I'm not just saying that because of your accent. I mean brilliant. I mean,
Makes me seem cleverer than I am.
It doesn't. Does it help? It doesn't hurt, right? And I think you're a really smart dude. You do really smart work, and I'm excited you came to hang out with us today. Thank you so much,
It's a
guys.
pleasure.
Next of Kin, check it out and make some noise for Jack Davenport right here, right here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.